My name is Kendra Hensley. I am 32 years old, and exactly last week, I stood completely paralyzed inside a freezing concrete storage unit, staring in absolute, suffocating horror at my unborn daughter's names painted perfectly on the cinder block wall. A police detective stood silently beside me in the gloom. The windowless unit smelled intensely, sickeningly of fresh interior paint and sweet baby powder. Sitting on the cold concrete was a pristine white crib built specifically for two, a wooden rocking chair, and a heavy wooden dresser completely full of newborn clothes, with the retail tags still firmly attached to the fabric. In the corner sat a little nursery lamp shaped exactly like a sheep. Somebody had meticulously, obsessively painted soft white clouds across the dark back wall of the unit, and directly under those clouds, painted in incredibly careful, looping cursive letters, were two names. My girls' names. Names I had absolutely never announced to anyone in the public world. On a cheap plastic folding table, stationed right by the rolling metal door, sat a massive stack of my stolen residential mail. Held tightly together with a thick rubber band, the detective turned to me, her voice echoing off the concrete, and quietly asked if I recognized the looping handwriting on the wall. I did. That was the exact moment my knees finally gave way, but here is exactly what absolutely none of the police knew in that moment. The deeply disturbed woman who had painstakingly built this secret room had been actively, obsessively rehearsing to systematically replace me for 9 agonizing months. And how exactly does a fully furnished twin nursery end up hidden inside a rented commercial unit out on Route 9? The terrifying answer officially starts at a pastel-colored baby shower in February. The exact day my older sister violently picked up a silver cake knife. Welcome back to Shattered Hearts. This is the exclusive sanctuary where quiet, compliant people finally step up to the microphone to tell the devastating, unvarnished stories their toxic families desperately hoped would stay permanently buried. If you have ever been violently told to simply keep the peace while someone else relentlessly demanded the entire spotlight, this specific story is absolutely for you. Drop a comment below and be sure to hit that subscribe button. Because the clinical, meticulous execution of my revenge is something you simply cannot afford to miss. Before any of this horrific psychological warfare began, I was just a dedicated pediatric nurse living in Springfield, Missouri. I worked grueling shifts, 3 12-hour rotations a week, at Mercy General Hospital. I had spent 8 long, exhausting years on the pediatric floor. I genuinely liked the graveyard night shift. I loved the quiet, rhythmic hum of the medical monitors in the dark, and the specific, beautiful way a terrified, sick kid naturally settles down when you physically sit down next to them. And instead of looming and standing over their bed, registered nurses learn one absolute ironclad habit incredibly early in our careers, and it legitimately saves human lives. We chart absolutely everything. Exact time, exact medication dose, the patient's physical response, and our personal initials. In the medical field, if it isn't written down in the chart, it simply didn't happen. I deeply need you to remember that specific professional trait. It intensely matters later. My husband, Travis, runs a highly successful 3-man commercial heating and cooling company. He is the exact kind of solid, dependable man who casually checks your basement furnace filter while he's over for Sunday dinner, and he absolutely will not take a single dime for the labor. No, we originally met when he was contracted to fix the failing air conditioning units on the pediatric wing during a blistering July heat wave. He nervously asked me out right there, in the concrete parking garage, actively sweating completely through his uniform shirt, clutching his metalwork clipboard tightly to his chest, exactly like a medieval shield. We happily bought a little, historic brick house over on Maplewood Drive exactly 4 years ago. It was absolutely nothing fancy. We painstakingly painted every single room in that house entirely ourselves, and Travis proudly built the heavy wooden porch swing from a cheap hardware kit that unfortunately came with the wrong-sized screws. A frustrating logistical error, which he stubbornly still brings up to this day. I am telling you all of this mundane backgrounds so you deeply understand exactly what I had built, and exactly what my sister violently decided I had stolen from her. I fiercely earned my peaceful life, one exhausting hospital shift at a time. Academic scholarships, crushing student loans, grueling double shifts, and driving a sputtering, second-hand car with a passenger mirror held together by duct tape until I was 28 years old. Absolutely nobody ever handed me a single thing. That specific detail is going to matter immensely too, because for 32 years, my family aggressively told a completely different fabricated story about my existence. They loudly proclaimed that things simply came easy for Kendra. That Kendra was the strong one. That Kendra inherently didn't need any help. When you hear it out loud, it deceptively sounds like a beautiful compliment. But if you hold that specific phrase up to the harsh light, you realize it is actually a permanent, unpaid job assignment, and inside the suffocating walls of my family, there was absolutely only ever allowed to be one single patient, and it was never ever permitted to be me. Her name was Melissa. She was exactly 3 years older than me. And by the time I was 10 years old, I already intimately knew the ironclad rules of the house. The toxic rules were incredibly simple. Whatever day it was on the calendar, it was officially Melissa's day. My milestone 10th birthday party was abruptly, violently canceled exactly an hour before my excited friends were scheduled to arrive. Why? Because Melissa dramatically doubled over with a mysterious stomach ache that had her thrashing and screaming in agony on the kitchen linoleum. My mom frantically drove her to the local urgent care clinic while my dad quietly stood by the landline and solemnly called the other parents to cancel the cake. The urgent care doctors found absolutely nothing physically wrong with her. By 7:00 p.m. that exact same evening, Melissa was sitting comfortably cross-legged in the living room, directly in front of the television, happily eating massive slices of my birthday cake, entirely pain-free. And my mom gently smoothed my hair, sighed heavily, and said, "She just needs us vastly more than you do, Kenny." I tragically used to think that suffocating sentence was the definition of love. It took me 20 long years of therapy to finally hear what it really, maliciously was. It happened relentlessly at my middle school choir concerts, my high school graduation, my own wedding rehearsal dinner. A sudden fainting spell, a crippling migraine, a devastating emotional crisis timed as perfectly and ruthlessly as a commuter train schedule. Melissa was absolutely never scolded for the sabotage, and she was never ever told that she was wrong. She was simply sensitive. She was inherently fragile. She was always deeply going through something. My mother, Lorraine, aggressively ran our family exactly like a stressed stage manager, catering to one single, erratic star, and the golden star could absolutely not stand the thought of anyone else ever stepping near the stage lights. There is one more highly specific thing you need to know about Melissa, and I deeply need you to keep it secured in your pocket for later. She fiercely, fundamentally hated being physically touched. She always had. Absolutely no warm hugs, no linked arms walking down the street, no comforting hand resting on her shoulder. The running family joke was always, "You have to greet Melissa exactly like a stray cat. You just stand still and let her come to you." Even at her own lavish wedding, she and her new husband Blake did a remarkably stiff, awkward little sway on the dance floor at complete arm's length, while absolutely everybody politely clapped. So, no. Absolutely nobody at that pastel baby shower thought twice about the glaring fact that not one single female guest had gently patted her pregnant belly in months. You simply didn't touch Melissa. You politely admired her from a highly respectful, sanitized distance, exactly like a fragile museum piece behind glass, which is exactly how my mother raised her to be treated. I am absolutely not telling you this history, so you will hate a little girl with a fake stomachache. I am telling you all of this because 30 unbroken years of that specific conditioning raises a terrifying psychological question that absolutely nobody in my family ever dared to ask out loud. What exactly happens to the golden star when somebody else finally has life-changing news? We tragically found out exactly 6 years ago when my dad's heart violently quit. He collapsed in the gravel driveway with a green garden hose still actively running in his calloused hand. He was only 58 years old. Roy Whitmore was a quiet, solid man who fixed broken things around the house and asked the universe for absolutely nothing. And I have spent a massive portion of my adult life desperately trying to be exactly like him. At his packed funeral, Melissa wailed so hysterically, so violently hard, that two broad-shouldered ushers physically had to help her out of the wooden pew. The entire silent church actively watched her dramatic exit, and my mother immediately went sprinting down the aisle right behind her, and that was the absolute last anyone saw of either of them at my father's memorial service. I stayed behind. I stood back and politely shook every single hand in the endless receiving line entirely by myself. I was 26 years old. Afterward, Melissa completely disappeared from family functions for 3 solid months. She is grieving in her own unique way. Mom constantly defended her. Meanwhile, I meticulously canceled all of Dad's magazine subscriptions. I filed the complex life insurance paperwork. I detailed and sold his beloved truck. And I dutifully sat with my mother at her kitchen table every single Sunday while she wept uncontrollably into the good floral tablecloth. One of those agonizing Sundays, Mom reached across the wood, took my hand tightly and whispered, "You are the strong one, Kendra. I honestly don't know what I would ever do without you." I proudly carried that heavy sentence around my neck exactly like a gold medal for years, long before I finally understood that it was actually a leather harness. The strong one absolutely never gets asked how she is emotionally doing. The strong one simply gets handed the legal paperwork to sign. The strong one sits quietly and waits her turn, and I deeply want to be honest with you, because this specific part is entirely on my shoulders. I actively liked being needed. After Dad died, physically and emotionally holding my shattered mother together became my unpaid second job, and I obediently clocked into that shift every single week without fail. That is my fatal flaw. It was never that I trusted people too easily. I absolutely never trusted Melissa an inch. It was that I fiercely believed my mother was mine to aggressively manage, mine to protect, mine to physically keep from breaking into pieces. It never once occurred to me to stop and ask exactly what my mother was doing with all that unfettered, intimate access to my soul. It really should have, because one humid August evening, sitting at that exact same table, right under that exact same floral tablecloth, I tearfully handed her the one fragile secret I absolutely couldn't afford to lose. Travis and I had actively started trying for a baby the bright spring I turned 30. Nothing happened. An entire agonizing year of absolutely nothing. Then came the invasive medical tests. Then came devastating clinical words like unexplained and diminished reserve, which are essentially just sterile doctor words for "we don't know why your body is failing, and we're incredibly sorry." We desperately did 2 brutal rounds of IUI treatments at $4,800 a cycle, which we painfully pulled directly out of our hard-earned porch remodel fund. Both rounds failed completely. I am a pediatric nurse. I intimately know the statistical numbers. Knowing the clinical numbers absolutely does not help you when you are sobbing uncontrollably on the shower floor at 2 in the morning. And it absolutely does not help you when you are standing paralyzed in the greeting card aisle in May. We kept the devastating struggle private. Completely, utterly private for 2 whole years. Except exactly once. One evening in August at my mother's kitchen table, she walked in and caught me quietly crying over a mundane diaper commercial on the television. And I completely broke down. I told her absolutely everything. I told her about the invasive tests, the 2 devastatingly failed rounds of IUI, the drained savings money, all of it. She held my hand tightly and fiercely swore to God that the secret would stay strictly between us. I told exactly one person in this entire world, hold on tightly to that specific detail. Travis never even told his own flesh and blood brother about our struggles. We weren't embarrassed or ashamed. We were just fiercely protecting something incredibly soft, the exact same way you would desperately shield a lit match from a howling wind. And I will proudly say this plainly, because women exactly like us absolutely do not say it enough in society. Infertility is absolutely not a personality flaw, and it is absolutely not a competitive entry in a race. It is a profound, suffocating grief that permanently lives inside your calendar. Every single month has a phantom due date in it that simply never existed. You aggressively learn to smile warmly at other people's joyous pregnancy announcements, with your back teeth up violently pressed together. And you get incredibly good at faking it, and you deeply, profoundly hate that you're good at it. By that humid August, I had gotten very, very good at it. So when late September came, and my cell phone suddenly lit up with a massive group text from my mother. All capital letters, a long row of flashing pink and blue heart emojis, I knew. Family dinner Sunday. Melissa has massive news. I put the glowing phone face down on the kitchen counter, quietly finished drying the ceramic dishes, and I rigidly practiced my joyous smile in the dark reflection of the kitchen window. I already implicitly knew exactly what the grand news was. It was always, inevitably going to be her news first. Melissa theatrically announced her pregnancy that Sunday evening in September, executing it the exact same way aggressive corporate executives launch a new tech product. She stood proudly at the very head of my mother's table, elegantly tapped a crystal glass with her fork, and unveiled a professionally framed sonogram, exactly like it was a winning lottery check, 12 weeks along. Due exactly at the end of March. And here is the absolute truth, the unvarnished, whole truth. I was happy for her, genuinely. Whatever deep psychological damage 30 years of hijacked birthdays had done to our relationship, a baby is a beautiful baby. And I sat there, watched my older sister physically glow in the dining room light, and I naively thought, maybe this finally softens her. Maybe this profound miracle fixes something broken inside her. My mother wept tears of pure joy and immediately started a massive family group chat, that exact same night playfully called Baby Watch. And for the next 2 agonizing months, Baby Watch was the absolute only channel our entire family broadcast on. Melissa abruptly quit her part-time job at the local furniture store to completely focus entirely on the delicate pregnancy. Mom proudly drove her to every single medical appointment, or at least she loudly claimed she did. Every mundane food craving got a heavily filtered photo update. Every microscopic physical twinge got a massive, detailed paragraph. I dutifully hit the little digital thumbs up icon on absolutely all of it while sitting exhausted in the hospital break room at midnight. And I never, not once, complained about the spam. And I desperately want that fact firmly on the official record. The absolute only person in that entire orbit who didn't physically glow was Blake. My brother-in-law is a massive, gentle bear of a guy who sells commercial insurance and endearingly laughs at his own terrible jokes long before he even reaches the punchline. And that autumn, his booming laugh went entirely missing. He would sit silently at family dinners with heavy, bruised dark circles under his eyes. He would obsessively cut his food into smaller and smaller microscopic pieces, and he would force a polite smile about half a second too late to be genuine. When I quietly pulled him aside in October and asked if he was sleeping okay, he rubbed his face and muttered, "Work is just crazy right now, Kenny. Commercial insurance is absolutely never crazy in October." I noticed his bizarre behavior the exact same way you notice a strange car parked slightly wrong on your quiet street. You mentally clock it, and then you just move on with your life. I had my own exhausting life aggressively running underneath all of this family theater. And, by late fall, my own personal world had quietly, miraculously caught fire in the absolute best way possible. But I need you to keep your eye firmly locked on Blake. Because out of everyone sitting at that crowded table, happily passing the dinner rolls and excitedly toasting the future, he was the absolute only person in the room who wasn't actively acting. In late October, the Baby Watch group chat went bizarrely quiet, not completely silent. Highly curated, the relentless daily bump photos abruptly stopped. And in their place came incredibly short, sterile text updates, typed exclusively by my mother. Melissa is resting. The doctor strictly wants her taking it easy. Please deeply respect her privacy right now. She is severely limiting all outside visitors. Melissa skipped the massive family Thanksgiving dinner entirely. Mom cheerfully delivered a heavy plate of turkey to the duplex and proudly reported back to the table that Melissa was doing absolutely beautifully. She was just incredibly tired. Something else fundamentally changed that absolutely nobody dared to name out loud. My sister, who had famously never been a willing hugger, completely stopped letting anyone within a 5-foot arm's reach of her at all. She came to exactly one brief family lunch in early December, heavily wrapped in a massive thick cream cardigan, sat stiffly at the far end of the table, and abruptly left before the pie was even served. I absolutely didn't connect the behavioral dots then. Why on earth would I? I maintained a strict, lifelong survival policy of deliberately not looking too closely at Melissa, the exact same way you instinctively don't stare directly into the burning sun. And besides, that exact miraculous week, my own world violently tilted on its axis. I came off a grueling 12-hour night shift on a freezing gray Tuesday in mid-December, and out of sheer, stubborn, masochistic habit, I quietly took a cheap pregnancy test from the battered box hidden under the bathroom sink. The value pack of disappointment, Travis jokingly called it, because bleak gallows humor is entirely free. I set the plastic stick on the cold edge of the bathtub and numbly started brushing my teeth. Then I violently stopped brushing my teeth. 2 lines, after 2 agonizing years of nothing. 2 clean, undeniable, blazing pink lines. I slowly walked out into the bright kitchen, holding the plastic stick, exactly like it was a fragile, injured baby bird. Travis took exactly one look at my face, looked at the stick, and sat straight down on the hard floor right next to the dishwasher. And we stayed down there on the freezing cold tile, holding each other, laughing and violently sobbing until his mug of coffee went completely cold on the counter above us. We fiercely decided, before we even physically stood up off the floor, that we would tell absolutely no one until the precarious first trimester was safely, completely behind us. 2 devastating years of heartbreak permanently buys you that level of intense caution. We had tragically lost phantom pregnancies that never even got past a positive test stick. And we would absolutely not hand this fragile miracle over to the loud world before it could safely hold its own physical weight. No one explicitly meant no one. For a beautiful while, we actually managed it. The clinical ultrasound appointment in mid-January is the absolute best memory I legally own. The ultrasound tech went completely quiet, tilted her head, and slowly turned the glowing monitor screen directly toward us. 2 distinct flickers. 2 strong, rapid heartbeats, twins, Travis, made a guttural, choked sound I have absolutely never heard from a grown man before or since. Something violently suspended between a terrified hiccup and a holy hallelujah. Girls, we would joyously learn later. 2 girls. I miraculously floated through my exhausting hospital shifts for a solid week. And then, I made the one fatal phone call I would give absolutely anything to take back. Please try to understand my flawed thinking, or at least my deeply ingrained family wiring. My mother was 61 years old, a grieving widow, and I had dutifully spent 6 entire years acting as her primary load-bearing wall. Melissa's extravagant baby shower was exactly 5 weeks out on the calendar. And I deeply knew, the exact way you inherently know your own toxic family's weather patterns, that if Mom found out later that I had deliberately hidden this massive news from her for months, the emotional fallout would violently land squarely on my shoulders for a decade. So I called her on a quiet Thursday night in late January. I breathlessly told her about the twins. I told her the beautiful names we had completely fallen in love with. Harper and Hazel, strictly because she eagerly asked, and because saying those names out loud to my own mother felt profoundly like introducing her to her new granddaughters. And then I said it clearly, explicitly, twice. Mom, this absolutely stays with you. Not one single word to anyone until completely after Melissa's baby shower. Her day officially comes first. I mean it. She went completely quiet on the line for 3 seconds. 3 seconds is absolutely nothing in a normal conversation. But 3 seconds is also a terrifyingly long time when you intimately know someone's conversational rhythms. And my mother's joyous congratulations, when they finally came, arrived exactly a half beat too late. Exactly like Blake's forced smile. Of course, sweetheart, she promised smoothly. Of course, that is Melissa's special day. I hung up the phone, feeling immensely lighter. I had done the mature, responsible thing, the highly considerate thing, the designated strong one thing. I had successfully managed everyone's fragile feelings and fiercely protected everyone's special day. Somewhere across town, I now horrifically know, my mother sat with that cell phone resting in her lap in a dark kitchen, holding my fragile secret in one hand and a vastly terrifyingly heavier one in the other. The extravagant baby shower occurred on the second Saturday of February at my mother's sprawling house. 30 loud guests, massive arches of pink and gold balloons, an expensive two-tier custom cake from the Good Bakery downtown featuring a silk ribbon elegantly tied around the cake knife, and a massive, glittering banner draped over the stone fireplace that cheerfully said, "Welcome, baby." Melissa proudly held court, sitting in a massive white armchair exactly like a visiting queen. Claiming to be at exactly 34 weeks gestation, she was meticulously opening expensive gifts while engulfed in that same massive cream-colored sweater she had been exclusively living in. I sat quietly off to the side, keeping my own magical 14-week secret safely tucked under a loose, flowing blouse. With twins, your body begins to physically show much earlier, and I was already being incredibly careful about exactly how I stood and moved. I dutifully fetched cups of pink punch for the older aunts. I sat with a notepad and meticulously wrote down exactly who gave what gift, because of course the administrative job was inherently mine. It was, by any conceivable metric, entirely her day, and I was completely, genuinely fine with that arrangement. Then came the grand toast. My mother proudly stood up, raised her crystal glass, and flawlessly got through 2 lovely, poetic sentences about the beauty of miracles and entering new chapters in life. And then her eyes swept deliberately past Melissa's face and landed directly, squarely on me. And I watched the betrayal happen in agonizing slow motion, the words violently leaving her mouth before anything could possibly stop them. And incredibly soon, this blessed family will have even more miracles to celebrate. Because Kendra is currently carrying twins, the crowded living room did that horrifying thing where every single overlapping conversation violently dies at the exact same time. 30 faces simultaneously swung toward me in the sudden, deafening silence. Somebody's oblivious aunt actually clapped her hands twice before she finally read the freezing temperature of the room. And Melissa slowly rose from the massive white armchair without making a single sound. She walked with terrifying purpose directly to the dessert table, and she picked up the silver cake knife. She turned around holding the blade, and she pointed it. She pointed the sharp steel blade directly at my stomach, at my hands, which had instantly flown down to cover my womb on pure, terrified maternal instinct, and she screamed at the absolute top of her lungs, "This is my day." The blood-curdling scream didn't scare me half as much as what immediately came after it. I put my empty palms out defensively and pleaded, "Mel, put the knife down, please, just calm down." And my sister aggressively leaned in, the blade trembling in her grip, and her voice suddenly dropped to almost nothing. A lethal, terrifying hiss, and she said, "You stole my life, and you stole my babies." Babies. I clearly remember that highly specific, plural word violently snagging somewhere deep in the back of my panicked mind. Even then, my Aunt Carol leaped forward, got a heavy arm around Melissa's shaking shoulders, and forcefully steered her backward. The silver knife clattered loudly onto the dessert table, violently ruining the frosting on the bottom tier of the cake. And my mother simply stood completely frozen by the fireplace, with her crystal glass still raised in the air, while her horrified church friends awkwardly stared down into their pink punch cups. I did absolutely not scream back at her. I kept my face entirely, rigidly still. I quietly collected my winter coat, grabbed my stunned husband by the arm, and we walked directly out of my mother's house, through a suffocating silence. You could have easily cut with that exact same knife. In the freezing cab of the truck, Travis sat completely paralyzed with his hands gripping the steering wheel, absolutely not starting the engine. "Kendra," he said slowly, his voice shaking. "Did you hear exactly what she said? Babies, plural. We haven't told a single, solitary soul on Earth there were two. Neither of us said a single word the entire 30-minute drive home. There was absolutely nothing safe left to say. Let me pause right here, because I can actively feel some of you watching this not fully believing me. A pregnant woman pulling a knife at a suburban baby shower sounds completely unbelievable. I was physically standing there, and I barely believed it myself. But the flashing knife was absolutely never the scariest part of this story. The scariest part was finding out exactly how long she had been meticulously sharpening it in the dark. Now, you might rationally expect that, aggressively pointing a silver blade directly at your pregnant sister's stomach in front of 30 horrified witnesses would earn a person some immediate, severe consequences. You absolutely do not know my family. My cell phone violently rang at exactly 7:00 a.m. the very next morning, and the caller ID flashed my mother's name. I stood in the freezing kitchen, the morning sun barely bleeding through the blinds, and I made the catastrophic mistake of hoping. I naively, desperately thought she was calling to frantically ask if I was physically okay, if the babies were safe, if Travis and I were recovering from the sheer terror of the ambush. She was absolutely not calling to check on me. "Your sister is in a highly fragile place right now," my mom stated. She used the exact same calm, sterile, managerial voice she had used to casually dismiss my feelings my entire life. That announcement was incredibly poorly timed, Kendra. You have to see that. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter until my knuckles went completely white. I quietly reminded her that the announcement had been entirely hers. She was the one who had raised the crystal glass. She was the one who had shattered my secret in front of a crowd. A heavy, suffocating pause hung on the phone line. Well, it was inevitably going to come out eventually. My mother dismissed smoothly, pivoting without a single ounce of remorse. "The main point is, Melissa feels completely blindsided, and I deeply need you to not make this bigger than it actually is. Bigger than it is." A sharp cake knife pointed directly at my abdomen at her lavish party. And my strict family assignment, my permanent, lifelong assignment, was emotional containment. I stood paralyzed at my kitchen counter, actively listening to my own mother aggressively negotiate on behalf of the unstable person who had just violently threatened her unborn grandchildren. And suddenly, something deep inside me went incredibly still and incredibly, terrifyingly clear, exactly like the chilling moment a severe fever finally breaks. "Mom," I said, my voice dropping into a dead whisper. She pointed a knife at my stomach, and my mother, without a single microsecond of hesitation, replied, "I will vividly remember this betrayal until I die." It was a dull cake knife, Kendra. It was her special day. There it officially was. The ironclad house rule, spoken plainly and brutally at last, delivered directly over a phone line to the designated strong one. I coldly told her I had to get ready for my hospital shift, and I hung up the phone. I didn't actually have work that morning. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, where Travis had left his coffee mug, and I did the exact, clinical thing 8 grueling years of nursing had aggressively drilled into my hands when absolutely everything on a medical floor is going catastrophically wrong at once. I took out a blank notebook. I meticulously wrote the exact date at the very top of the page, and I immediately started charting February 9th. Party, knife, exact quotes, complete list of witnesses, February 10th, 7:02 a.m., phone call, exact words. In the medical field, if it isn't explicitly written down, it legally didn't happen. Fine. From now on, absolutely everything was going to be meticulously written down. Aunt Carol called my phone that following Wednesday. Carol is my mother's younger sister, a retired, no-nonsense school bus driver, equipped with a ruthless lie detector, exactly where most polite people keep their manners. And she had been the specific relative to bravely walk Melissa backward off of me at the shower. She got exactly 2 sentences of polite small talk in before she completely gave up the charade. "Kendra, honey," Carol sighed, her voice heavy with gravel. "I deeply need to tell you something, and I need you to physically sit down for it. That chaotic, violent mess on Saturday absolutely wasn't a sudden, hormonal snap out of nowhere. According to Carol, ever since late January, weeks completely prior to the baby shower, Melissa had been aggressively working the family phone tree, calling distant cousins, repeatedly calling my mother's church friends, viciously telling absolutely anyone who would listen to her that I had been maliciously faking my fertility problems just for cheap sympathy, and that the absolute moment her golden pregnancy finally got the family's undivided attention, I had suddenly, conveniently, miraculously turned up pregnant myself, with twins, no less. Because, according to Melissa's twisted narrative, Kendra always desperately has to win. She confidently told me you had been violently jealous of her your entire life. Carol said softly. Carol said she had it all perfectly organized, exactly like a little rehearsed speech. Honey, she was actively telling people about your twins long before your mother ever raised that glass. I thanked Carol. I hung up, and I wrote absolutely all of it down in the notebook. Then I sat entirely alone in my quiet kitchen and let the 2 impossible, terrifying pieces violently knock against each other. My devastating fertility struggles, told to exactly one person, exactly once in August, my twin pregnancy, told to exactly one person, exactly once in late January, Melissa inexplicably had possession of both highly classified secrets, and she had possessed them early enough to meticulously build a massive, coordinated smear campaign out of them weeks before the actual shower occurred. The knife hadn't been a sudden, emotional snap. It had been a grand opening night, which left a horrifying, suffocating question I could barely stand to mentally hold. There were only 2 living people sitting in that kitchen in August, and one of them was me. I looked at that terrifying sentence in my notebook for a very long time. The ink felt like it was burning a hole through the paper. Then I slowly wrote under it, in incredibly small letters, the absolute most generous, desperate theory available to my breaking heart mom. Let it slip. Moms excitedly let things slip. I underlined the sentence twice, exactly as if physically underlining it could magically make it true. The malicious Facebook post officially went live exactly 11 days after the baby shower. It featured a highly curated, dramatic photo of Melissa with her mascara artfully, perfectly wrecked by tears. One hand was resting protectively on the swell of that massive cream sweater, and underneath it were 3 dense paragraphs I could effortlessly recite for you today. She wrote a devastating narrative claiming that her sacred baby shower had been aggressively hijacked and completely destroyed by a deeply toxic family member who simply could not stand to let me have one single day of joy. She wrote that she had been verbally, viciously attacked while heavily pregnant and had to be physically protected by terrified relatives. She absolutely never used my name. She didn't have to. Over 200 comments bloomed violently under the post, exactly like toxic black mold. Praying hands emojis. Broken hearts. Some pathetic people desperately need public attention, exactly like they need oxygen. Stay strong, mama. Read one comment. My younger cousin Dana, whom I had personally spent hours teaching how to drive a car, commented a frowning face emoji. By that exact same weekend, two of my elderly great-aunts had formally unfriended me on the platform, and a wealthy woman from my mother's church stopped me dead in the aisle of the grocery store, looked completely down at my rounding, pregnant belly in absolute disgust, and just slowly shook her head exactly like I was a horrific car crash she was morbidly driving past. I deeply want to tell you the absolute truth about what that kind of orchestrated isolation does to a person, because the truth is incredibly embarrassing. At midnight, heavily pregnant, hormonal, and blindly furious, I sat alone on my living room couch and aggressively typed out a massive reply. 4 dense paragraphs. The exact dates, the named witnesses, the silver cake knife. My thumb was hovering dangerously directly over the post button when my cell phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was the hospital charge nurse, asking me if I could cover a shift on Sunday. And I looked down at my own furious words, glowing in the dark living room, and I clearly heard myself think, as crisp and clear as a medical bell. If you post this, Kendra, you are officially a contestant. The absolute only prize in her psychotic game is attention, and the absolute only way to win is to permanently stop playing on her stage. I deleted the massive reply. I opened a secure folder on my laptop instead, carefully labeled it with the exact date, and I methodically screenshotted absolutely everything. Her deceptive post, every single toxic comment, the unfriendings, all of it. Evidence absolutely doesn't need to shout. Evidence absolutely doesn't need Facebook likes. Melissa was aggressively building an audience. Fine. I would meticulously build a legal record. March officially arrived, and with it came a strange, terrifying season of small, highly deniable cruelties. A pristine flower delivery arrived completely unannounced at my front door. Massive, fragrant white lilies, the highly specific, pungent kind traditionally used exclusively for funerals. With a tiny card tucked inside that simply said, "In loving memory," and absolutely no sender's name. A massive cash-on-delivery order of newborn diapers that I absolutely never placed arrived at my house. It was the very first of 6 separate, exhausting deliveries, each one requiring me to waddle out and stand on my porch, deeply pregnant, and awkwardly explain to a highly confused delivery driver that, no, I absolutely hadn't ordered anything. Then the chilling calls started at the hospital. The unit secretary frantically flagged me down one night. A woman had phoned the secure pediatric desk twice, aggressively asking exactly which specific shifts Nurse Hensley was working. She claimed to be a close family friend, excitedly planning a surprise. We absolutely do not give out personnel schedules, obviously. The woman had abruptly hung up both times. I logged every single terrifying incident in the notebook. Exact date, exact time, what occurred, who physically witnessed it. And somewhere in the middle of week 3, silently reading the log back to myself. On my midnight break, the terrifying pattern physically stood up and looked me dead in the eye. The funeral lilies arrived on the exact day of my 16-week OBGYN appointment. The first malicious diaper stunt landed precisely on the day of my specialized genetic blood work. The harassing hospital calls came on the exact same afternoon my OB's office called my personal cell to reschedule my 20-week anatomy scan. Every single psychological strike landed perfectly on a day that specifically meant something in my pregnancy. Days that existed absolutely nowhere in the public world except inside my own private calendar and my highly secure medical file. Sat completely frozen in the hospital break room with my notebook resting on my knees and a cup of freezing cold coffee. And I wrote exactly one terrifying sentence, and I boxed it heavily in black ink. It's like she has my calendar. Travis was blindingly furious. He desperately wanted to drive his truck straight to the duplex and violently have it out with Blake and Melissa. I firmly talked him down, and I will tell you exactly why. Aggressive confrontation was the exact, engraved invitation she was desperately waiting for. Every single stunt was a doorbell she was gleefully ringing, eagerly waiting for me to answer it, violently angry. In public, preferably on a camera, so the unhinged sister story she had brilliantly built could finally come true. I would absolutely not answer the doorbell, but I did start asking a significantly colder, more terrifying question in the margins of my nursing notes. Not, why is she doing this? How does she know? I got my devastating answer to neither of those desperate questions on the very last Friday of March. I walked into the sterile waiting room of Riverbend Women's Health for my rescheduled 20-week anatomy scan, checked in at the glass desk, sat down heavily in a plastic chair, reached for a mindless magazine, and there she was, Melissa, sitting directly across the waiting room, entirely engulfed in that same massive cream sweater, her hands folded perfectly over the enormous swell of her belly, actively watching me with a small, chilling, patient smile. Exactly like she had been politely holding my seat for me. My rescheduled appointment time existed in exactly 3 highly secure places on Earth: my locked cell phone, Travis's locked cell phone, and my encrypted hospital chart. Small world, Melissa chimed, her voice projecting loud enough for the entire waiting room to hear. I absolutely did not perform. Every single pregnant woman in that silent waiting room was actively watching us, and some primal, survival animal instinct deeply told me that a captivated audience was the entire point of the ambush. That somewhere in her twisted Facebook story tonight, I would undoubtedly be the unstable, violently jealous sister who caused a massive screaming scene at a peaceful medical clinic. So, I calmly stood up, walked directly back to the front desk, and quietly asked the receptionist exactly 3 questions. Nurse to receptionist: has absolutely anyone called this office asking about my appointments? Can you please add a strict, high-level privacy flag to my chart right now? Can you please check your system and tell me whether anyone but me has digitally accessed my online portal account? The receptionist typed rapidly, frowned deeply at her screen, and typed again. Absolutely no outside calls logged, Mrs. Hensley, she assured me. Privacy flags are permanently on now, and no, absolutely no one but you has ever logged into your online portal. That night, gripped by pure paranoia, I violently changed every single password I owned anyway, turned on every 2-factor alert, and wrote the entire horrifying scene down in the notebook, while Travis read over my shoulder, his jaw muscles working furiously. Here is exactly what I deeply need you to understand about this nightmare. I absolutely did not shrug this off. I clearly saw the massive, waving red flag. I actively acted on the red flag that exact same day, in absolutely every single way a careful, logical person possibly could. The medical system itself looked me dead in the eye and officially told me I was secure. When they finally, devastatingly found the digital leak months later, it tragically turned out to be somewhere absolutely no password change could ever reach. A forgotten door I had casually left open 6 years earlier and had absolutely every logical reason to believe was permanently closed. We will get there. Melissa never actually had a medical appointment that day. The front desk quietly confirmed it to me. She had just completely known exactly where I would be, and she had showed up just to watch me sweat. The very first week of April, Melissa unexpectedly texted me and asked to meet. Neutral ground, she claimed. A quiet, independent coffee shop over on Commercial Street. Just us girls, Kenny. Just to completely clear the air. I went entirely against Travis's furious advice for exactly one reason. My nursing notebook had a glaring, blank column meticulously labeled her side, and I am the highly specific kind of person who aggressively fills in blank columns. For 10 agonizing minutes, I sat across a small cafe table and witnessed a theatrical performance, fully worth the price of admission. Tears arrived at the exact perfect cinematic moments. A trembling, delicate hand rested constantly on the massive belly. The pregnancy hormones just have me completely, totally all turned around, Kenny. She wept perfectly. You know I would absolutely never, ever actually want to hurt you. She delicately dabbed her dry eyes with a paper napkin, and I explicitly watched her eyes dart over the rim of the napkin to rapidly check whether the older couple sitting at the next table was actively watching her performance. Then came the aggressive pivot, smooth and effortless as a musical key change. but you have to completely understand exactly how awful it looked, Kendra. Announcing twins at my baby shower, she whispered, shaking her head. You've been second your entire life, and I completely get that this was finally your big moment, but it was heavily supposed to be my special day, my day, always the exact same words, smooth and worn as river stones. And then came the ultimate ask. The real, calculated reason for the cheap coffee and the fake tears. So, I really think for the health of the family, you should politely post something on Facebook. Melissa offered gently, just completely clearing up that it was all a big misunderstanding and publicly saying you're incredibly sorry for how it all unfolded. Mom totally agrees. It would mean so much to her. There it was. A public, digital confession, entirely drafted by the offender, eagerly co-signed by my own mother, demanding to be published permanently under my name. I looked at my sister across the table for a very long moment, and I simply said, "No, Mel, I'm absolutely not going to do that." And I vividly watched the tears completely shut off. They didn't slowly fade. They violently shut off exactly like a plumbing faucet, mid-drop. What was left looking back at me from across the table was completely flat, terrifyingly cold, and infinitely older than both of us. I stood up, put exact cash on the table for both of our drinks, and walked directly out the door. It was the terrifying tap I kept obsessively thinking about on the drive home. You absolutely cannot fake plumbing like that. The weeping was the mask. The bone-dry eyes were my actual sister. Melissa's highly publicized due date was the very end of March. It came and went with absolutely no news, and I will openly admit, the total silence felt incredibly strange. But an April working in a pediatric hospital violently eats your attention, and I willingly let it. Then, the second week of April, my mother frantically summoned the entire family to a healing dinner at the estate. And right before anyone could even lift a silver fork, she stood up, rigidly gripped the back of her dining chair, and tragically announced through heavy tears that Melissa had lost the baby. Stillborn, my mother wept, dabbing her eyes. At 36 weeks, she claimed it had happened incredibly privately, with immense dignity, and that Melissa desperately needed our unconditional love right now, absolutely not our questions. The entire dining table made the exact horrifying sound a family makes when the floor violently gives out beneath them. My great-aunt wept uncontrollably into her cloth napkin. Cousin Dana ran out of the room to the bathroom, and I sat there in pure shock, with my hands protectively over my own twins, and I genuinely, profoundly grieved for my sister. Honestly, physically grieved. Because whatever lethal weapon she had pointed at me in February, I would absolutely not have wished this profound hell on her in 1,000 years. I frantically reached for my cell phone under the table to text Blake. My heart, my help, anything they needed. And that is exactly when the logistical details started aggressively refusing to line up in my nurse's brain. Absolutely no hospital was ever named in the announcement, and I intimately know every single delivery ward in 3 surrounding counties. Absolutely no funeral arrangements, no tiny grave marker, no exact date of delivery. Melissa absolutely doesn't want a memorial service. It would completely break her. Mom insisted. Blake absolutely never answered my desperate text message, or anyone else's. I learned later. He had allegedly gone down to his brother's cabin in Tulsa to grieve exactly like men do. A toxic sentence that absolutely belongs in a museum of things that mean the exact opposite of what they loudly say. And no questions meant absolutely no questions. When Cousin Dana gently, tearfully asked what the baby's name had been, my mother simply looked at her, just stared, and Dana instantly apologized for asking. I drove home that night with my profound grief slowly, sickeningly curdling into something highly dangerous that I couldn't name and desperately didn't want to. In my notebook, I wrote down the sterile facts. Then I sat in the kitchen with the pen hovering over the paper. Then I added, "No hospital, no name. No Blake." I violently closed the notebook. Some terrifying doors you are absolutely not ready to open, even when your own hand wrote the address on the envelope. The fake grief completely rearranged the entire family board, and every single piece aggressively moved toward me. Overnight, the violent baby shower was completely forgotten, the knife was entirely forgotten, and a brand new, suffocating story settled over us, exactly like an avalanche of snow. Melissa had tragically lost absolutely everything. Kendra had absolutely everything. And decent, loving people balanced their accounts. My mother said it right out loud at a Sunday dinner in late May, casually spooning green beans onto my dinner plate, exactly like a financial down payment. Your babies are absolutely all she has left in the world now, Kendra. Mom pleaded smoothly. Please, let her be a vital part of this pregnancy. It would completely heal her broken heart. Within a single week, the escalating requests rapidly arrived. Each one enthusiastically relayed through Mom, each one vastly bigger and more invasive than the last. Melissa desperately wants to come to the final anatomy scan. Melissa absolutely should be in the delivery room with you. She's a mother now, too, in her grieving heart. Melissa would absolutely love to be the godmother. And then, on a random Tuesday phone call, came the specific one that made my ears physically ring. Melissa has some truly beautiful thoughts on baby names, sweetheart, my mother crooned. You definitely have room for a loving compromise there, honey. You're having two room for compromise on my daughter's names. Travis, who had spent 3 agonizing months being forcefully talked down by me, finally boiled completely over at that dinner table. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping violently against the floor, and said the very first hard sentence he had ever spanked to my mother. Something incredibly plain and devastatingly true about flashing knives and apologies nobody had ever bothered to make. And he walked straight out to his truck. Me? I did it vastly quieter, because quiet is my native, lethal language. I looked dead at my mother and I said, "No, Mom, to absolutely all of it, no." One little word. And you would have thought I had violently fired a gun inside a church. She actually took a physical step backward from the table. I had absolutely never said it to her before. Not once in 32 years. It felt exactly like the first word of a foreign language I desperately should have learned as a little girl. Exactly 2 days later, my mother mentioned incredibly breezily mid-phone call that she had heard my highly private 26-week OB appointment had gone absolutely beautifully. I hadn't told her about that specific appointment. I hadn't told anyone. In early June, my mother casually asked me to sort through my dead dad's old clothes for the church donation drive. A mundane chore she had been delegating to me for 6 years, and one I had never once minded, because an hour alone smelling my father's old flannel shirts is its own profound kind of chapel. The heavy cardboard boxes lived securely in the guest room closet, Dad's things on the very bottom shelf, Mom's precious keepsakes directly above, thick photo albums, saved ribbons, and the rusted old butter tin where she had obsessively saved every single greeting card anyone had ever mailed her. I absolutely wasn't snooping. The heavy tin was awkwardly wedged against the box of flannels I desperately needed to move. And when I pulled the box, the tin lid violently popped open, and a lifetime of pastel birthday cards fanned out beautifully across the carpet. I knelt there on the floor, gathering them up, half smiling at the ancient, faded ones. And then I completely stopped breathing. Wedged squarely between a generic get well card and a folded church bulletin lay a crisp, folded piece of modern printer paper. And right through the sharp fold, I could clearly see the distinct, gray cone of an ultrasound image. I slowly opened it. It was mine. My highly classified 20-week anatomy scan. The exact one from the very last Friday of March. Riverbend Women's Health, printed proudly across the top header. My specific patient ID number stamped in the corner. Both of my babies caught mid-wiggle on the screen. A direct, digital printout of a secure screen I had absolute only ever seen from inside my own encrypted online portal account. And written straight down the white margin, directly next to each little gray profile, someone had meticulously written my daughter's names, Harper. Hazel, in handwriting I had intimately known since childhood. Looping, pretty, and unmistakably my sister's, each specific name heavily underlined twice in ink. My daughter's secret names were underlined twice in my sister's handwriting on a highly secure medical printout I had absolutely never given to anyone on earth. I don't definitively know exactly how long I knelt there paralyzed on the guest room carpet. Long enough to clearly hear my mother happily humming to the radio in her kitchen. Exactly one floor of carpet and drywall away, close enough to easily call out to. I had told those specific names to exactly one person on this earth. The guest room was terrifyingly quiet, and the two horrifying facts stood in it with me, firmly holding hands. The medical leak came directly through my mother's house, and whatever toxic information was actively flowing through that pipeline was ending up heavily annotated, underlined, and meticulously filed in my unstable sister's hand. I did absolutely not walk downstairs into the kitchen. I folded the printed scan into my purse with hands that had gone full-blown trauma nurse. Completely, terrifyingly steady because they absolutely had to be. I calmly finished boxing up my father's flannel shirts, gently kissed my traitorous mother's cheek at the front door, and drove all the way home with the truck radio completely off. All 15 miles. Listening to nothing but the deafening roar of my own pulse. Here is the exact moment I permanently stopped being a grieving daughter with hurt feelings and officially became a medical professional with a severe tactical problem. First thing Monday morning, I took my meticulous nursing notebook, my digital screenshot folder, and that stolen annotated sonogram directly to a ruthless family law attorney named June Albright. June possessed a sharp gray bob, thick reading glasses hung on a silver chain, and a physical handshake that felt exactly like a steel nutcracker. She required a $2,500 cash retainer up front. It was worth every single cent for the exact thing she said to me in the first 10 minutes of our consultation. Stop desperately trying to figure out why she is doing this, Kendra, June commanded, tapping her pen. Crazy is absolutely not your case. Pattern is your case. Document absolutely everything, say nothing to anyone, and simply let her keep talking. Then she gently tapped the folded sonogram with the names Harper and Hazel written on it. And we do not confront this specific leak yet. If your mother is the active channel, that channel is now a tactical asset. A channel can be tested. So, we brilliantly tested it. That Sunday at family dinner, as calm as you please, I smoothly served my mother a massive lie right alongside the pot roast. I told her, just her, with the dining room doors closed, our voices hushed low, strictly girl to girl, that my OBGYN doctors had just made a critical medical decision. Because I was carrying high-risk twins, they explicitly wanted me delivering at St. Vincent's Hospital across town, absolutely not at Mercy General where I actually worked. Every single word of that was entirely false. My delivery was strictly planned for Mercy General. It had always been permanently planned for Mercy, and exactly 3 living souls on Earth knew that fact. Me, Travis, and June Albright's yellow legal pad. My mother eagerly received the false secret with a warm, maternal squeeze of my hand and a solemn promise, God love her, that it would stay completely between us. A canary in a coal mine doesn't actually have to do anything. June had smoothly explained to me in her office. It just has to sing where only one specific tunnel can possibly hear it. If the name, St. Vincent's, ever came back to me in a vicious social media comment, a harassing phone call, or a vindictive stunt, I would instantly have my concrete proof of the entire toxic pipeline, mother to sister. Absolutely no computer password required. I drove home that night feeling a profound emotion I hadn't felt since February. It took me miles of driving in the dark to accurately name it. It wasn't safety. It was initiative. For 4 agonizing months, this sick psychological game had been violently played on me. Starting that Sunday, I was officially dealing the cards. 2 weeks later, in the humid middle of June, my neighbor Ruth from directly across the street frantically flagged me down at my mailbox. Ruth is 74 years old, sleeps exactly like a paranoid cat, and misses absolutely nothing that happens on Maplewood Drive. Sweetheart, Ruth whispered, looking nervously over her shoulder. "Does your sister ever visit you late at night?" I physically felt my face do something incredibly careful. Ruth grimly described it. Around 2:00 in the morning, twice that very week, a dark car had parked silently down past the Hendersons' house. A woman had walked quietly back up the sidewalk to stand completely still at the side of our house. The north side, where the spare bedroom is located. The specific room with the unassembled crib boxes clearly visible through the glass window, and she was just standing there. Staring the second night, Ruth swore to me the strange woman had actually raised a glowing cell phone and taken flash photographs of the window, of the dark, empty window of my daughter's someday room. The very next morning, I found soft, unmistakable dents deliberately crushed into the flower bed directly under that specific window. The tidy oval prints of a woman's flat shoes. I meticulously photographed the footprints next to a yellow tape measure, exactly like a forensic investigator working a crime scene. Because by then, I absolutely was. I didn't frantically call my mother. I didn't post a hysterical warning about it on Facebook. I immediately called a private security company off a trusted work friend's recommendation. And by that Friday, our house was fortified with a high-definition doorbell camera, 2 blinding motion sensor floodlights, and a dedicated camera mounted directly over the garage, covering the entire north side of the property. Travis relentlessly walked the perimeter of the yard every single night before bed. That whole summer, holding a mug of coffee, trying to look as casual as a man checking his tomato plants, but operating with the fierce vigilance of a lighthouse. And still, my residential mail started mysteriously going missing. Little, insignificant things at first. Things you would naturally blame on a clumsy postal service. A bank statement that simply never arrived. A birthday card from Aunt Carol containing a $20 bill she fiercely swore she had mailed. Then, the hospital clinic's appointment reminder postcards vanished. 2 months running, I formally filed a mail hold for physical pickup at the post office, and I noted every single chilling gap in my nursing notebook, which had now aggressively multiplied into 2 completely full notebooks. You could easily call all this documentation paranoid. In July, you would have been entirely right to wonder if I was losing my grip. By November, a stunned police detective would be meticulously photographing that exact same rubber-banded brick of stolen mail sitting on a folding table out on Route 9. The cryptic text message came on a Thursday night in late June from a phone number I hadn't seen light up my screen since April Blake. "Can we please talk?" "Not on the phone. Please don't tell Mel or your mom. Please." I stared at the glowing screen for a terrifyingly long time. Travis read the message over my shoulder and immediately asked, "Is it a trap?" Which clearly tells you exactly where our family dynamic was by June. But I kept obsessively thinking about the gentle man with the missing laugh, silently cutting his dinner food smaller and smaller all autumn, the absolute only person sitting at that dining room table who wasn't actively acting. Some people go entirely quiet because they are deeply guilty. Some people go quiet because they are violently carrying something too heavy to hold, I texted back. A diner out on Route 6. Saturday, 10 a.m. He was already sitting there when I arrived early, which Blake absolutely never is. He was folded securely into the very last vinyl booth with his broad back pressed to the wall. 2 cups of black coffee were already going cold on the table, and a thick manila folder was squared up perfectly in front of him, exactly like a condemned man about to confess to a horrific crime that wasn't actually his. He looked significantly thinner. He looked exactly like a glossy office headshot of himself that had been carelessly left out in the freezing rain. When I slid into the booth opposite him, he tried to politely say hello and only managed about half of the word. Then he put his large, trembling hand flat on top of the manila folder. "Kendra," Blake whispered, his voice cracking, "before I open this, I deeply need you to know that I desperately wanted to tell you in April. I wanted to tell absolutely everyone. I was outvoted. Outvoted in a toxic family system, intimately think about what that specific word actually means, and exactly who possesses the power to cast the votes. I looked at the closed folder resting under his freckled hand, and I understood with absolute, suffocating clarity that whatever was waiting inside it was going to violently break the entire story of my family right in half. That there would forever be a before this diner booth and an after this diner booth. I reached across the table for it anyway. Before I tell you exactly what was inside that folder, if this terrifying story is hitting entirely too close to home for you, do exactly one thing for me tonight. Rigorously check exactly who still has digital access to your life. Your medical accounts, your patient portals, your spare house keys. The medical proxy permissions you innocently set up years ago and completely forgot about. I naively thought a simple changed password made me completely safe from my family. I was catastrophically wrong, and it cost me an entire summer of terror. Inside Blake's folder was a stark, sterile hospital discharge summary, dated the 20th of October. Cox South Emergency Department, located exactly one town over. Patient, Melissa Carr, and printed on the very second line, in the devastatingly flat, clinical language that modern medicine uses when it simply cannot afford to process human feelings, were the exact words that violently rewrote my entire year fatal demise. 17 weeks, October. 17 weeks. And I stared at the paper and did the clinical math in my head the exact same way a nurse checks a lethal medication dose twice. Desperately hoping to be wrong. The baby my entire family joyously toasted at the lavish shower in February had been physically gone since the 20th of October. The bulging belly hidden under that massive cream sweater was deliberate, theatrical padding. The pink and gold balloons, the expensive two-tier cake, the silk ribbon tied around the blade of the knife. It had all been a macabre, terrifying party, hosted for a child who completely no longer existed, thrown enthusiastically by the one other woman in that living room who absolutely knew. Because she undeniably knew, Blake's voice came out sanded completely flat. It was my mother, Lorraine, who frantically met them at the ER that horrific night. Lorraine, who sat stoically in the sterile hallway while Melissa was delivered the devastating news. And out in the freezing parking lot at 2:00 in the morning, it was Lorraine who gently took her shattered daughter's face in her hands and aggressively constructed the master plan. We absolutely do not tell people yet. You'll officially announce the tragic news when you are fully ready. Let Mom handle the family. Then, the extravagant baby shower invitations actually went out in the mail in January, Blake said, his eyes welling with tears. And I genuinely thought, she'll cancel it. She absolutely has to cancel it, and your mom just kept calmly saying, let her have this one special day. It is a vital part of her healing process. He had desperately begged them both to get Melissa to a doctor of the psychological kind. Lorraine's unyielding answer never once changed. Therapy is exclusively for strangers. Family heals family, and there was vastly more. The true reason he physically couldn't sit inside the delusion anymore, it hadn't been her first loss. 4 other pregnancies over 6 agonizing years, all ended tragically early, all viciously hidden from the world. A private, invisible ladder of profound grief my sister had been desperately climbing entirely alone, while the family simply admired her flawless image from the required, respectful distance. Everyone standing at that shower was blissfully toasting a baby who had been gone since October. And the absolute only 2 women who knew the terrifying truth were the ones holding the cake. I deeply thought about the silver knife violently pointed at my stomach, and the chilling sentence hissed under it, "You stole my life and my babies." And the horrific memory changed in my hands exactly like a Polaroid photograph developing in a dark room. She hadn't been publicly announcing her petty hate. She had been violently announcing a severe, psychotic delusion, one that my own mother had happily catered, decorated, and mailed premium invitations for. Blake's cell phone violently buzzed on the table between us. Mel flashing angrily on the screen. He went completely gray, turned the screen face down on the laminate table, and neither of us took a breath for a full second. I deeply want to be careful here, because this is the exact part of the story where some of you will inevitably say, "She was severely sick, Kendra, have some mercy." And I absolutely did. I sat alone in my car outside that roadside diner and I sobbed uncontrollably for my older sister. I cried for 17 weeks, for 5 devastatingly hidden losses, for the fragile girl raised strictly as an exhibit who was absolutely never taught how to be a functioning person. Mercy was absolutely never the question. The terrifying question was exactly what that mercy is allowed to cost, and exactly who my toxic family had decided would be the one to pay the blood price. Because deep pity absolutely does not make a disturbed person safe to be physically near. Sometimes it makes them vastly less safe. And everyone who supposedly loved her had voted unanimously to leave her wildly untreated and deliberately aim her directly at me. I got my definitive answer about the physical cost that exact same weekend. Sunday night. 1:40 in the morning, the motion sensor floodlight violently tripped. The new doorbell camera caught the entire sequence perfectly clean. A shadowed figure standing at our back wooden gate, aggressively working the heavy metal latch, the gate code to which exactly 4 people on planet Earth knew. Because my mother meticulously kept our spare house key and alarm codes hanging on a little cup hook in her pantry. Labeled. Because of course she did. The heavy latch scraped loudly in the night, the blinding light hit, and the figure turned and walked rapidly away down the fence line. Unhurried and entirely wrong, hugging a massive, empty canvas duffel bag tightly to her chest, her chin tucked deep into her coat. You couldn't clearly see the face on the camera. I absolutely didn't need to see the face. Monday morning, June Albright sat in her office, watched that chilling 11-second video clip exactly twice without blinking, and then decisively opened her legal calendar. "We are officially done collecting evidence," June stated coldly. "Now, we file." An ex parte order of protection was immediately granted by a Greene County judge that Thursday afternoon, built entirely on the staggering strength of 2 packed nursing notebooks, 1 massive folder of screenshots, 1 anonymous flower card, 1 footprint photo in a flower bed, and 11 terrifying seconds of midnight video. "It's temporary," June warned me sternly. "The real test is the final hearing. Both sides present, evidence presented on the formal record." The hearing was initially set for September, then bumped by the court's backlog, then bumped again, finally landing on November 14th. The legal system is agonizingly slow. She was absolutely not. From that Thursday onward, my entire life became a suffocating countdown with a terrifying date stamped at the bottom of it. November 14th. Hold on to that date. The county sheriff officially served Melissa the restraining order on a Friday afternoon. My cell phone spectacularly detonated by dinner time. My mother's furious opening line possessed absolutely no hello. "A legal restraining order against your own grieving sister? Have you completely lost your mind?" I sat at my kitchen table, heavily 8 months pregnant, and I just let her go. I listened to the weaponized fragility, the manufactured grief, the family handles, family lecture, the entire toxic hymnal. And while she frantically preached her gospel, I did something incredibly new. I said almost absolutely nothing back, not out of fear. Pure, clinical strategy. June's commanding voice echoing in my head. "Let them talk, Kendra. Absolutely everything they say to you right now is just inventory." And my mother, aggressively monologuing to a silent daughter over the phone, was just criminal inventory wrapped in a floral blouse. "You know she would absolutely never actually hurt you physically," my mother pleaded desperately. "This is entirely just about her needing attention, Kendra. It was always supposed to be her turn." And then she quickly caught herself and frantically pivoted to how a disgraceful court order would look to the women at her church. What my mother absolutely did not know, while monologuing about attention, was that a pristine copy of a Cox South Hospital discharge summary was sitting securely locked inside my lawyer's fireproof safe. She aggressively lectured me about Melissa's healing process, without knowing that I intimately knew exactly what there was to heal from. She didn't realize that every single righteous, defensive sentence tumbling out of her mouth was self-incriminating testimony delivered entirely free of charge to the quietest, most lethal audience of her entire life. I just quietly said, "Okay, Mom, I really have to go, Mom." And the exact second she hung up, I meticulously wrote every single word down in the notebook. The family violently sorted itself that very weekend, exactly like separated laundry. Two great aunts and my cousin Dana went entirely, freezing cold. But Aunt Carol called my phone, and her voice had heavy, furious gravel in it. "I was standing exactly 3 feet away at that shower, Kendra," Carol stated bluntly. "Honey, I absolutely know what I saw, and I know exactly what I heard her scream. And if a county judge wants to hear it too, you give them my cell number." First witness officially volunteering, and then she added, almost casually, the specific thing that explicitly told me the narrative tide was violently turning under the family's feet. "And Kendra? I've been really thinking about it lately. Nobody ever actually did see Melissa's bare belly, did they? Not once, just that massive sweater. Even the women in the church choir are starting to count the math. The protective order strictly required Melissa to stay a minimum of 500 feet from me, my home, and my hospital workplace. Exactly 11 days after she was legally served by the sheriff, I opened my front door at 6:00 a.m. to leave for a day shift, and I nearly stepped directly onto a pristine white box. No postal stamps, no gift note. Just a thick ribbon tied in a careful, immaculate bow. Inside the box, folded meticulously in tissue paper exactly like something profoundly precious, were 2 newborn bodysuits, soft, pastel yellow, and across each tiny cotton chest, flawlessly embroidered by hand in rose-colored thread, was a name Harper on one, Hazel on the other, names we had still told absolutely no one but my mother. Names that existed strictly on honest ultrasound printout in my sister's looping handwriting, now permanently stitched meticulously with needle and floss. Hours and hours of obsessive work under a good reading lamp onto clothing intended for my unborn children, left maliciously on my front doorstep by a woman legally barred by a judge from ever standing on it. I deeply want you to sit with the terrifying hours involved in that task. Rage is incredibly fast. A malicious Facebook post takes exactly 1 minute to type. Even the violent flash of the knife took only a split second of blinding madness. Embroidery is incredibly slow. Embroidery is terrifyingly patient. Somewhere across town, my unhinged sister had spent whole, quiet, obsessive evenings pulling my daughter's stolen names through soft fabric. Letter by agonizing letter, loop by loop. Meticulously planning what? A beautiful gift? A territorial claim? I stood paralyzed on my wooden porch in the July morning light, with the white box in my trembling hands. And for the very first time since the shower in February, I was purely, physically afraid for my life. Then, I did exactly what I had rigorously trained myself to do, instead of feeling things at 6:00 in the morning. I meticulously photographed the box on the porch exactly where it lay. I carefully bagged the entire thing in a massive 2-gallon Ziploc bag from my own kitchen, evidence style, tissue paper, ribbon, and all. I called the police non-emergency line, met a uniformed officer on my hospital lunch break, and officially filed report number 1 for the severe violation of an active order of protection. The officer, a young guy with incredibly kind eyes, held up the clear plastic bag and studied the immaculate stitching. "This is entirely hand-done," he said softly. "Somebody took real deliberate time with this." I looked at him and said, "I know, that's exactly why I called you." With an official violation report filed and a final hearing cemented on the docket, June finally had the immense legal leverage she had been building toward all spring. A sweeping subpoena for the hospital portal system's back-end access records. Not the simple view the clinic's front desk receptionist sees. The massive health network's actual, encrypted audit logs, the deep ones nobody at a reception desk can ever access or alter. It took the massive health network's corporate legal department 3 agonizing weeks to comply with the subpoena. On a Tuesday afternoon in late July, June called me directly into her office, laid a thick stack of printouts on her desk, and slowly turned it around to face me, exactly the way a jury foreperson would hand over a verdict. The receptionist at the clinic actually told you the absolute truth back in March, June said grimly. No one but you ever accessed your specific patient account with your passwords. She just wasn't looking at the right digital account. 6 years ago, recovering from an emergency appendectomy, I had casually signed a routine hospital form giving my mother temporary proxy access to my medical patient portal. One quick signature, one hazy recovery, one ride to a follow-up appointment, completely forgotten by March of that specific year. The smaller clinic I had used back then had since been corporately folded into the exact same massive hospital network as Riverbend Women's Health. The digital proxy came right along with it, dormant and completely invisible in my user settings, but glaringly, actively alive in theirs, Lorraine Whitmore. Authorized representative, 31 distinct logins in 8 months. June had meticulously matched every single login timestamp against my nursing notebooks, line by terrifying line. A login the exact morning the funeral lilies arrived at my house. A login the day before the waiting room ambush, exactly 20 minutes after Riverbend confirmed my rescheduled ultrasound scan. A login the exact evening before the hospital switchboard started getting harassing calls about Nurse Kensley's schedule. My mother hadn't just let something slip at a casual kitchen table. My mother had been actively, maliciously running a highly coordinated surveillance operation on her own pregnant daughter and delivering the daily intelligence take directly to the unstable woman who had pointed a knife at me. 31 times, methodically over the course of months. And the canary. The canary sang its lungs out that exact same week. On a distant cousin's Facebook thread, complaining about exorbitant hospital bills, there was Melissa aggressively commenting from her personal account, openly mocking certain arrogant people in this family who think they are vastly too good for Mercy General and desperately have to deliver at St. Vincent's. St. Vincent's, the completely false detail. The one specific lie I had spoken aloud to, exactly one person exactly once, over pot roast with the dining room door securely closed. The pipeline was completely, undeniably documented. My medical chart to my mother's eyes, my mother's mouth directly to Melissa's hands, Melissa's hands directly to my front doorstep. June clicked her silver pen and said the absolute only celebratory thing I ever heard her say in that office. We have absolutely both of them now. Now, we get you safely through this high-risk delivery, and we just quietly wait for November 14th. Neither my mother nor my sister had absolutely any idea what devastating cards we were holding. They just kept right on talking. Harper and Hazel Hensley were safely born on a Thursday at the very end of July at 37 weeks by scheduled C-section at Mercy General. Exactly where the plan had always been, Harper came out first, absolutely furious about the eviction, 5 pounds and 1 ounce of loud opinion. Hazel peacefully followed a minute later at 4:14 p.m., as calm as a Sunday morning, and the entire operating room laughed, because you could already definitively tell whose temperament came from whom, when the nurses laid them gently on my chest. Both at once, skin to skin, one tiny, perfect ear resting against each of my collarbones. Travis leaned down, put his forehead against mine, and sobbed for the very first time in the 10 years I had known him. Big, silent, shoulder-shaking tears, his massive hand covering both of their tiny backs at the exact same time, exactly like a protective tarp over fragile seedlings. I had spent 8 years working exactly 3 floors above that delivery room. I naively thought I knew exactly what happened in it. I knew absolutely nothing. Nobody ever tells you that their physical weight gets measured in tiny ounces, but their emotional existence lands on your chest in metric tons. For one whole glorious day, I completely forgot I even had a sister. That is the absolute honest truth, and I am not sorry for it for a second. For one day, there was absolutely no order of protection, no terrifying audit log, no padded cream sweater, no ticking countdown to November. Just a bag of warm laundry sound asleep on my chest in duplicate, and an exhausted man snoring upright in a vinyl hospital chair with one sock completely off, drinking a paper cup of hospital ice chips that tasted, I swear to you, exactly like expensive champagne. Aunt Carol visited the room briefly with two tiny crocheted hats, didn't stay long, and cried happily in the doorway on her way out. My mother sent a massive arrangement of flowers to the front desk. They had the nurses immediately redirect them to the children's ward without even reading the attached card. And I deeply want you to know that the rejection didn't even hurt me. That is exactly how overwhelmingly full the room was. The world occasionally gives you profound days exactly like that. Strictly, so you will have something precious worth defending in the dark. Because it was about to aggressively remind me exactly why defending it mattered. Here is what absolutely nobody in my toxic family knew about that hospital delivery. I had spent the entire month of July preparing for it exactly like a military exfiltration mission. Because hospitals possess incredibly strict security protocols for exactly my dangerous situation, and I am a veteran nurse. I knew every single one of those protocols by name. Our medical admission was aggressively flagged as confidential. If you called the main switchboard and asked for Kendra Hensley, the operator's mandated answer was that no such patient existed in the system. The maternity ward inherently runs behind a secure, coded door anyway. But our specific chart carried a massive, glaring security alert with a hard legal copy of the protective order attached directly to it. And the approved visitor list had exactly 3 names on it: Travis, Aunt Carol, and my charge nurse best friend, Deb, who was explicitly tasked with bringing contraband milkshakes. Friday morning, the day after the girls were born, the unit secretary picked up a suspicious outside call, a woman's voice on the line. Warm as pie, so incredibly sorry to bother the busy staff. She claimed to be the patient's loving sister. Stated the family had planned for a delivery at St. Vincent's but switched at the very last minute. And could someone just kindly confirm the room number? She desperately wanted to send some celebratory balloons. The secretary, bless her highly trained heart, confirmed absolutely nothing. She immediately logged the threatening call at exactly 9:40 a.m. and reported it straight up the chain of command because of the glaring red flag on my chart, St. Vincent's. My beautiful, brilliant canary, singing for the second time on a recorded hospital line to a maternity desk. The false, planted detail had successfully traveled the entire toxic pipeline again and walked right into a secure log with a definitive timestamp on it. Exactly an hour later, hospital security physically escorted a suspicious woman out of the second-floor parking garage. She had been loitering between parked cars near the skywalk entrance. Absolutely no visitor badge. She left the premises without an argument when firmly approached by guards, so there was absolutely no formal police report filed beyond a brief line in the security shift log description. Mid-30s, sunglasses, wearing an oversized cardigan, it was 94 degrees outside that day. I read that specific line in the security summary that June later requested, sitting completely safe behind a heavy-coated door with a tiny daughter asleep on each arm, and I felt the strangest, most profound calm wash over me. Every single door she aggressively tried to open, I had already heavily locked. For once in my life, being the designated strong one, who obsessively plans for the absolute worst, was paying out in full. The final, terrifying knock came on a Tuesday in late October. The girls were exactly 12 weeks old. I was 3 weeks back on my day shifts, and the serious woman standing on my porch held up a laminated state badge. Ms. Hensley, Children's Division. Following up on a serious report. Every single parent's stomach intimately knows the sheer terror of that sentence long before the brain fully translates it. Someone had maliciously called the state abuse hotline about my infant daughters. The anonymous report, she gently explained inside my living room, specifically alleged that a negligent night shift nurse was aggressively leaving her newborn twins entirely unattended. It claimed the infants were failing to thrive and missing critical medical care, and that there were wildly unsecured weapons lying around the home. Anonymous, of course. I deeply want to tell you exactly what pure fear tastes like when someone maliciously aims the full weight of the government at your innocent children. It tastes exactly like a copper penny resting under your tongue. And then I want to tell you exactly what 8 months of ironclad clinical discipline does to a person. I didn't hysterically argue. I didn't tremble or cry. I charted. I calmly walked Ms. Fields completely through my immaculate home, armed with the massive binder I keep on the girl's health. I provided records of every single pediatric visit since birth. Showed her weight curves, climbing perfectly like aggressive stock charts, flawless vaccination records, the pediatrician's direct after-hours line. I showed her the spotless nursery, the heavily locked medication lockbox, and the indisputable fact that the absolute only weapon in our house is Travis's hunting rifle, secured in a biometric safe. I calmly explained, and then extensively documented with official court and hospital HR paperwork that I absolutely hadn't worked a single night shift since the twins were born. Day shifts only. My official schedule was stapled neatly to the fridge. Mess. Fields was incredibly kind, highly thorough, and completely done with the investigation in 90 minutes. Case completely closed as unsubstantiated, she stated warmly, and paused at the front door with her tablet resting against her hip. She legally couldn't reveal the identity of the anonymous reporter, she said. And then, utilizing the incredibly careful voice of a professional, staying strictly inside her legal lane, while casually pointing at the lane over, she added a detail. But the report specifically mentioned your night shifts, Kendra, and it incredibly accurately described this home's exact interior layout. Most anonymous hotline reports absolutely don't come with a detailed floor plan. The specific architectural details in that malicious report belonged exclusively to someone who had been intimately inside my family's dinner conversations, or aggressively inside a massive stack of my stolen mail. After her state car safely pulled away, I stood in my hallway physically shaking with a blinding nuclear fury I hadn't permitted myself to feel all year, because this was entirely new, unforgivable territory. The knife had been aimed at me, the Facebook post, the funeral lilies, the waiting room ambush. Me. This fabricated CPS report was a deliberate assassination attempt aimed directly at taking my children. And underneath the roaring fury, cold and chillingly quiet, rested a terrifying question with absolutely only bad answers. If she tragically couldn't get my babies on legal paper, what exactly was she physically building instead? On the 8th of November, exactly 6 days before the final hearing, my cell phone rang at 4 Lake in the afternoon with a number I absolutely didn't know, and a stern voice I had never heard said, "Mrs. Hensley?" "Detective Moss, Springfield Police Department. Do you have a minute?" "It's concerning a commercial storage unit out on Route 9. Detective Moss would say almost absolutely nothing of substance on the phone. She simply mentioned a commercial facility called StoreSafe and a rented unit whose deeply disturbing contents appeared to directly concern me and my infant children. Could I please come out in the morning and take a look, and definitely bring my photo ID? And then, she left a heavy, chilling pause on the line that I have thought about many times since. "Maybe don't come entirely alone, Mrs. Hensley." Moss suggested quietly. "Travis's mother came and took the girls to her house that night for safety. I absolutely didn't sleep, and I didn't even try to. I stood completely frozen in the doorway of the nursery for a very long time, listening to the two of them breathe out of sync. Harper snuffling aggressively like a tiny, flooded engine. Hazel completely silent and serene, remaining the calm one even when deeply asleep. And I agonizingly ran the whole 9 months through my trembling hands exactly like a coarse rope. The cake knife in February, the funeral lilies in March, the waiting room ambush, the tears that shut off like a broken faucet at the coffee shop, the padded sweater, the gate latch violently scraping at 1:40 in the morning, the rose-colored thread, 31 unauthorized portal logins, a detailed floor plan deployed in a vicious hotline report. Every single one of those terrifying things I had meticulously caught, clinically logged, safely bagged, and tactically countered. And on paper, I was undeniably winning. The protective order, the audit logs, the upcoming hearing. But exactly 6 days out, standing in that quiet doorway, absolutely none of it felt like winning. It felt exactly like I had spent 9 agonizing months rigorously documenting the barometric weather of a Category 5 hurricane from inside the fragile house. And tomorrow morning, the homicide detective was going to open the front door and force me to look at the sky. 9 months of clinical documentation, and I still absolutely wasn't ready for a heavy metal door on rollers. Around 3:0 a.m., Travis came and stood heavily behind me without saying a single word, and we just watched them sleep the exact way terrified people watch a spreading fire. You intimately know how tiny babies breathe with their entire fragile torso, ribs, belly, and shoulders all completely in on the massive project. And finally, he softly said the absolute only thing there was left to say. Whatever the hell is inside that unit, Kendra, it permanently ends this week. One way or the other, it ends. At 8:40 the next morning, we slowly pulled into the crushed gravel lot of StoreSafe on Route 9, and Detective Moss was grimly waiting for us by Unit 214, with the heavy metal door already rolled up. You already implicitly know what was inside Unit 214, because I opened this entire story standing paralyzed inside of it. Now, let me tell you the rest of what my horrified eyes found once my knees finally came back to me. The pristine white crib was fully assembled. A high-end convertible double, the exact, highly specific model from the private baby registry I had started online and absolutely never sent a link to a single soul on Earth. Online registries, it terrifyingly turns out, are entirely searchable by name. The heavy dresser drawers were meticulously organized by size, newborn to 6 months, tags still firmly attached. Girl colors explicitly organized on the left, and taped securely to the inside of the top drawer was a freshly printed schedule. My schedule, my old shift rotations at Mercy Generals, my specific OB appointment dates going all the way back to March, the girl's upcoming 2-month pediatric checkup, printed, highlighted, and heavily annotated in the margins in that unmistakable looping hand. On the concrete wall, directly above the rocking chair, hung photographs. Our house shot at night from the street, the north nursery window. The heavy crib boxes sitting on my porch the exact day they were delivered by the freight company. Travis standing in the yard holding a cup of coffee and the mail, and a massive, rubber-banded brick of that stolen mail sitting on the folding table. My missing bank statements, Aunt Carol's birthday card, the $20 still tucked inside it, 2 appointment reminders stolen from Riverbend Women's Health, and at the very bottom of the table, tucked neatly inside a manila folder, exactly like school homework, was a typewritten draft, 3 pages, addressed directly to the State Children's Division, maliciously alleging severe neglect by a night shift nurse, with highly specific phrases I instantly recognized, because I had heard Miss Fields read them off her state tablet while standing in my hallway. This unit was exactly where the devastating hotline report was meticulously written. Inside a rented concrete room with painted clouds on the wall. Sitting at a cheap folding table right next to a lamp shaped like a sheep, Detective Moss's department had been frantically called by the facility manager, a heavy-set, sweating man named Gary, who kept desperately apologizing to me exactly like any of this was his personal fault. After hours, the facility's security door alarms had aggressively flagged Unit 214 twice that week. And on Tuesday night, he had rolled up the door and found a woman sound asleep inside it, curled up in the wooden rocking chair, tightly wrapped in a pastel baby blanket. Criminal trespass after hours. A police welfare check. The responding officers instantly saw the massive stack of stolen mail, a severe federal offense, sitting right there on the table. They ran the specific names beautifully painted on the wall through the state database. and Harper and Hazel Hensley immediately came back attached to an active, high-alert order of protection with my name explicitly on it. My own meticulous legal paperwork had led the police straight to me. One more major thing, Mrs. Hensley, Moss said, heavily flipping her notepad. The unit is absolutely not rented to a Melissa Carr. The commercial lease says, Lorraine Whitmore. Behind me, completely quietly, Travis said a horrific word I absolutely will not repeat on this channel. I looked up at the painted clouds and the sheep lamp and my infant daughter's stolen names, and I said, yes, that is my mother. Moss walked me directly through the damning paperwork in the manager's cramped office, sitting under a humming fluorescent light with a cheap space heater ticking in the corner. The commercial lease for Unit 214, signed the 3rd of March, exactly 2.5 weeks after the disastrous baby shower. $89 a month, 9 consecutive payments processing on autopay, and the credit card on file undeniably belonged to Lorraine Whitmore. Gary, entirely wretched with apologies, remembered the rental day incredibly well. An older lady, very wealthy and put together, said the extra space was specifically for her daughter. A whole nursery's worth of expensive things. Claimed they were going through a hard time and just desperately needed somewhere safe to keep it all until things settle. They had come back to the unit together over the sweltering summer, more than once, happily unloading boxes of baby items. He distinctly remembered them laughing together. My mother had willingly signed that lease in the exact same 2 weeks she was relentlessly calling me about Melissa's fragility and my poorly timed announcements. March to November, the entire agonizing time. Every single Sunday dinner where she cheerfully passed me green beans and warmly asked how I was sleeping. The elegant hummingbird letter preaching about fixing this as a family. Absolutely all of it happened while her legal name sat on a lease, and her $89 a month actively bought the concrete room where my psychotic replacement was actively being furnished. And I have to be surgically precise here, because clinical precision is absolutely all I had left in my life. I do not genuinely believe my mother thought she was funding a kidnapping. I deeply believe she thought she was managing one, the exact same way she had successfully managed the fake stomach aches, the dramatic funerals, the lavish shower for a baby who was already gone, storage until things settle, as if a severe psychotic delusion were just a bulky sofa, as if when the whole messy situation finally blew over, the white crib could quietly come home to whichever daughter magically needed it by then. She hadn't maliciously lit the fire. She just rented it a room, kept it well fed, and made absolutely sure nobody ever called the fire department. While I blankly signed the police property release sheets, my cell phone buzzed loudly on the counter. A text message from Mom, sent directly from a warm kitchen exactly 15 minutes away, with absolutely no idea where I was currently standing. Mom. Sunday dinner. I made your absolute favorite. It's been way too long, sweetheart. I looked at the glowing screen for a very long moment, standing under the fluorescent hum, right next to a homicide detective bagging and cataloging my stolen mail. Then I thanked Gary, thanked Moss, walked directly to the truck, through the gravel lot, sat in the passenger seat, and rode the entire 20 minutes home in dead silence, with my mother's text glowing mockingly in my lap. And exactly 5 days left before the hearing. I never answered it. There was an entire courtroom for that now. November 14th came down incredibly gray and bitterly cold. The Greene County Courthouse hallway smelled intensely of wet wool coats and cheap floor wax, and my entire family had already sorted itself onto the wooden benches, exactly like a wedding. Absolutely nobody wanted to attend. Aunt Carol, Blake, and Travis were cemented on one side, my mother's loyal people on the other, Cousin Dana nervously studying her phone, the great aunts huddled in their Sunday coats. My mother arrived early, of course, wearing her pristine navy funeral suit, and made straight for me before June Albright could even intercept her. She desperately took my hand in both of hers, pressed it tightly, and whispered, incredibly urgent and warm, exactly like we were secret conspirators. It is absolutely not too late to stop this, sweetheart. Walk in there and politely tell them it was all a terrible misunderstanding. We were going to fix this as a family. Exactly 5 days after a detective had explicitly showed me her signature on that storage lease, she said it directly to my face again. And I looked at her. I really looked at her, the exact clinical way you would read a patient's chart. And I profoundly understood that she wasn't lying. That was the terrible, rotten center of my mother. She fiercely believed it. Every single word. The exact same way she had deeply believed a lavish party could magically cure a devastating loss, and a concrete storage unit could safely hold a psychotic delusion, and I could be casually spent like cheap housekeeping money to successfully keep her firstborn's weather calm. I took my hand back incredibly slowly, without any heat, the exact way you cautiously take a surgical instrument away from someone who absolutely shouldn't be holding it, and I said nothing at all. And her face violently changed, as if I had screamed at her. Then the far heavy doors opened, and Melissa confidently came up. The hallway flanked by her expensive defense lawyer, and the wooden benches went completely silent. One row after another, exactly like a crashing wave dying on a beach, she was incredibly radiant, perfectly serene, and under her open wool coat, unmistakable, deliberate, and horrific, was the soft, rounded front of a woman happily in her second trimester, the cream sweater, absolutely. Nobody moved. Nobody asked. In a crowded hallway, completely full of people who had joyously toasted her at a baby shower in February, not one single person met her eyes, and every last one of us was internally counting the impossible math. Courtroom 4 was small, suffocatingly warm, featuring a massive ceiling fan that ticked loudly on every single rotation, and it held, by my precise count, 19 members and friends of the Whitmore family. By the time the bailiff finally closed the heavy doors, Judge Ann Hollis presided. A compact, formidable woman in her 60s, with the distinct air of someone who has heard every single lying version of every single story, and would strongly prefer the short one, please. June rose and gave it to her, and the short version took exactly 40 exhausting minutes, because the short version was 9 agonizing months long. She formally entered the nursing notebooks into evidence. 63 distinct incidents. Dated, witnessed, signed, the photographs of the footprints by the north window, the funeral lilies, the white box on the porch, the yellow bodysuits came completely out of the Ziploc bag, and June held them high up by the shoulders. Tiny and yellow, the rose thread names violently catching the fluorescent light. And asked the room to officially note they were meticulously hand-embroidered, and the ceiling fan ticked loudly in a silence that had immense, suffocating weight. Then, the hospital audit log, 31 unauthorized accesses by an authorized proxy, matched exactly to the timeline. June read them out in devastating pairs. Deadpan, lethal login, incident, login, incident, login, incident, then the maternity desk call log. 9:40 a.m. A caller explicitly citing since then June's explanation, incredibly brief and surgical, of the canary. A completely false detail spoken exactly once to one single person at a Sunday dinner, and I watched Judge Hollis completely stop writing, look up slowly, first directly at my mother, then chillingly at Melissa, and carefully lay her silver pen down flat on the bench. Aunt Carol testified to the cake knife in plain, bus driver declaratives that absolutely no cross-examination could dent. She pointed it at the pregnant one. I was 3 feet away. I physically moved her arm myself, and then it was me. I had specifically worn my comfortable work shoes for physical steadiness. I answered June's questions in perfect chronological order, kept every single answer incredibly short, and did not look at the family benches once. At the very end, June asked me what I deeply wanted the court to understand, and I stated the exact sentence I had exhaustively practiced at the nursery door at 3 left in the morning. The absolute truest one I possessed. I am absolutely not here to punish my sister, Your Honor. I am here solely because my daughters cannot physically testify for themselves. The fan ticked. Somewhere right behind me, a great aunt was quietly crying. I found out later it was one of the two who had aggressively unfriended me in February. I kept my hands folded and my voice perfectly level, and I stepped down from the stand. Calm is a powerful language, too. I had been fluent in it my entire life. This was simply the first room that ever bothered to hear it. Melissa's defense lawyer opened by dismissively calling the whole matter a tragic family misunderstanding, deeply inflamed by profound grief, and for a brief moment, the family benches breathed slightly easier. Then June called Blake Carr to the stand. Watching a decent man completely dismantle his own life under oath is absolutely not a thing I ever want to witness again. He kept his eyes locked on the wooden rail, his voice at a devastated mumble the judge twice had to ask him to raise, and he laid absolutely all of it out, the emergency room in October. 17 weeks. The discharge summary now formally entered as an exhibit. The sinister plan hatched in the parking lot at 2 in the morning. The shower that aggressively went forward in February anyway. The padding hidden under the cream sweater. He had physically found it, he testified, hidden in the laundry, and had been coldly told it was a posture pillow. The 4 earlier losses over 6 years, completely hidden one by one. His desperate begging for a doctor, a counselor, anyone, and the chilling answer that came back every single time from his mother-in-law in her pristine kitchen, delivered as calm as scripture. Therapy is for strangers. Family heals family. I should have gone over both their heads, Blake said finally, talking directly to his own shaking hands. I kept telling myself, family knows best. I was outvoted. You can be outvoted right off a cliff. Then Detective Moss took the stand. She put Unit 214 up on the massive courtroom screen, and I actively listened to 19 people violently inhale at the exact same time: the pristine crib, the painted clouds, the names, the stolen schedule taped in the drawer, the stalking photographs of my house at night, the heavy brick of stolen mail, the drafted hotline report sitting on the folding table, and the commercial lease. 3rd of March, Lorraine Whitmore, $89 a month. State charges pending, Moss noted, professionally colorless. Stalking, severe mail theft, and violation of a protective order. Additional findings officially referred to the prosecutor. Through absolutely all of it, I watched my sister sitting at her defense table, because I physically couldn't not. She sat perfectly, chillingly composed. Her hands folded elegantly on the padded swell under the sweater, watching the massive screen proudly show her stolen nursery to the county. And her lips were moving barely, a faint whisper with a specific rhythm to it, the exact same shape over and over. And from my seat in the second row, I finally made it out, and my whole ribcage went terrifyingly cold. 17 weeks.
4 days.
17 weeks. 4 days. It absolutely wasn't a legal defense. It was a rosary, somewhere buried deep under the horrific performance, and the padding, and the rose-colored thread. My sister was still physically standing in a sterile hospital hallway in October, endlessly counting the days. For exactly one breath, God help me, I genuinely grieved for her. Then the judge asked if she wished to formally testify, and Melissa proudly stood up and smiled. She was incredibly good for about 90 seconds. Highly composed, beautifully wounded, gracious. The coffee shop performance perfectly scaled up for a courtroom. My sister seamlessly accepting the starring role of a lifetime. She spoke eloquently of profound grief, of sisters growing tragically apart, of desperately hoping for family healing. And then her own defense lawyer asked the specific question he absolutely had to ask. The one that would magically humanize her to the judge. Was she fully aware the storage unit's contents specifically referenced her nieces? And Melissa looked up at the massive screen, still frozen on the painted wall, with Harper and Hazel written in careful looping letters, and something in her face violently came entirely off its hinges. Referenced, she said quietly at first. That's their room. The terrified lawyer desperately tried to move on. She violently rose out of her wooden chair instead, and her voice rose directly with her. and 30 years of practiced, delicate fragility burned completely off in front of the entire county, exactly like morning fog in the hot sun. "They were supposed to be mine!" Melissa shrieked. "She stole them. She actively watched me lose mine, and she went out and took two because she desperately takes everything." Her lawyer clamped his hand hard on her arm. She violently threw it off. The armed bailiff was rapidly moving. Judge Hollis's heavy gavel was slamming. The family benches were completely frozen in sheer terror, and Melissa violently turned away from the screen, looked directly at me in the second row, and aggressively pointed, no silver knife this time. Just a shaking, furious finger, but the exact same lethal trajectory. My body, my center, and she screamed the exact sentence she had been rehearsing since a February afternoon with a ribbon blade in her hand. "This was my day. It was always supposed to be my day!" The heavy gavel slammed again and again. "Order in this court," she was still violently shouting as the bailiff forcefully walked her out of the room to compose herself, shouting about the baby shower, about the names, about absolutely everything she felt she was owed. And every single unhinged word she landed drove another heavy nail directly into her own legal case, sworn officially on the record in front of 19 horrified witnesses who had known her since she was born. Her lawyer sat down incredibly slowly, the exact way men sit when the building has already completely collapsed around them. I did absolutely not move. I did not make a single sound. My hands stayed perfectly folded on my lap, and I watched my sister be physically removed from a courtroom, confessing at full volume, and I finally understood the whole tragic shape of it. She had desperately waited her entire coddled life for a room full of family to look at absolutely no one but her, and here at the absolute end, she finally got it. The very last stage she will ever be given, and absolutely no one in the audience was clapping, and she was vastly too sick to tell the difference. Judge Hollis took 20 minutes in her private chambers, and she came back with a voice that sounded exactly like a closing steel door. "Fool, ironclad order of protection. 1 year, instantly renewable. Absolutely no contact with me, Travis, or the minor children. No third-party contact. And I want counsel to explicitly explain to the respondent's family precisely what third party means." Judge Hollis snapped 500 feet, immediate surrender of any spare keys or gate codes. The severe, pending criminal matters would proceed completely separately in state court. Given the horrific testimony, the court strongly encouraged counsel toward a resolution involving mandated, lockdown, psychiatric evaluation, and the court would formally be making a medical referral regardless. Then she squarely tapped her papers, took off her reading glasses, and looked directly at the second row, exactly where my mother sat frozen in her navy suit, and the entire courtroom held its breath. "Mrs. Whitmore," Judge Hollis stated coldly, "you are absolutely not a respondent here today, and this court has no legal order for you. But this criminal record has your name permanently all through it. A secret proxy account, 31 unauthorized accesses, and a commercial lease. This family did absolutely not arrive here despite your help. It arrived here directly by way of it. The county attorneys will inevitably draw their own legal conclusions from this, and so, I suspect, will your shattered family." That was absolutely all. It was completely everything. In the marble hallway afterward, the family sorting happened all over again in violent reverse. The great aunt stepping physically back from my mother, one small step, and then another. The exact way you cautiously move back from a stove you've just painfully learned is blazing hot. Cousin Dana crossing the wide hall to me with her phone hanging completely forgotten in her hand, tears aggressively streaming down her face, saying, "I'm so sorry, Kenny," over and over. My mother stood completely alone by the massive courtroom doors in her pristine navy suit, straightening her expensive hummingbird scarf with small, precise, frantic tugs, and called out desperately to the retreating backs of her own generation. "I was keeping this family together," she pleaded. Absolutely nobody answered her. Nobody even slowed their pace. Aunt Carol fiercely put an arm through mine. Travis securely got the other side, and we walked completely out of the building, through the wet wool, smelled directly into the freezing cold. And right behind us, her frantic voice bounced off the cold marble and came right back to her entirely alone. On the massive courthouse steps, the bitter November wind came straight down the street with absolutely nothing to slow it. And Travis pulled my coat collar up securely with both hands, exactly like he was tucking in a little kid. Across the parking lot, Blake sat completely alone in his car with the engine off, his forehead resting heavily on the steering wheel. Aunt Carol warmly squeezed my arm and marched straight over to knock on his window, because Carol is always Carol. I stood for a quiet minute in the gray light, one hand resting on the freezing cold stone railing, and looked back up at the heavy doors of the building. Where, in the span of one long, exhausting morning, I had been believed fully, officially, completely on the record for the very first time in 32 years, 9 months, 63 incidents, 31 logins, 2 packed notebooks, 1 canary, 1 judge. The silver knife was absolutely never the scary part. I got securely in the truck, and we drove home to our beautiful daughters. It has been exactly 6 weeks since the hearing, and I am recording this story from a peaceful house you haven't seen, in a new city I absolutely won't name, exactly 2 hours entirely away from Springfield. We put the little brick house on Maplewood up for sale the very Monday after court. Neighbor Ruth cried, then immediately helped us pack boxes, then aggressively gave the owners a highly detailed, full security briefing on the neighborhood, I'm told. And a massive hospital here miraculously had an opening on their pediatric floor that fit exactly like it was tailored specifically for me. We didn't run. We chose. There is a profound difference, and it took me an entire, horrific year to learn it. Running is when you frantically leave to get away from someone. Choosing is when you leave to get securely towards someone. And those someones are sound asleep down the hall. In a beautiful nursery, we painted completely ourselves. Absolutely no painted clouds. No names painted on the wall. They have a whole magnificent life for people to learn their names the ordinary way, the final legal ledger. Since I explicitly promised you consequences you could count, Melissa officially signed a massive plea agreement in December, the severe stalking and violation charges, with the federal mail count folded directly in. Entirely conditioned on lockdown, inpatient psychiatric treatment, which her defense attorney desperately fought for, and I absolutely did not oppose. Because a locked, secure ward with actual doctors is the very first honest room my older sister has been given in 35 years. The psychological evaluation officially named it a severe delusional disorder woven intricately through complicated grief. 5 losses deep, actively untreated by design. Her ultimate sentence is treatment. Mine, I suppose, is forever knowing that if exactly one person in that family had said the word doctor in October instead of aggressively saying shower, absolutely none of us would know what a courtroom ceiling fan sounds like. Blake formally filed for divorce and completely moved to Tulsa near his brother. A card quietly came from him last week. No return address inside, just a cheap gas station card with a red cardinal on it. Tell the girls someday that their Uncle Blake tried. I will. He absolutely gets to be in the story I tell them, because he bravely earned it at a diner table, and again, under oath. The fake nursery in Unit 214 was finally released from police evidence in December. I had it donated, every single stick of it, to a local women's shelter downtown. Wooden cribs are entirely innocent. It's absolutely not their fault where they get assembled. Except the back-painted wall, which Gary the manager aggressively painted over himself before we ever even asked. Gray primer, 2 heavy coats, and my mother. My mother writes to me, exactly once a month, utilizing the expensive Hummingbird stationery mailed to my new unlisted address, courtesy of absolutely nobody I've identified yet, and honestly, it doesn't even matter. I absolutely don't read them, and I absolutely don't burn them. They go directly into a cardboard shoebox on the top shelf of the hall coat closet, sealed, neatly dated in my handwriting, and meticulously charted exactly like everything else. Some toxic doors you absolutely don't have to slam. You just completely stop standing in front of them. Here is the absolute one thing I intimately know, now that I didn't know at that baby shower. Love entirely without boundaries absolutely isn't love. It's just a sterile waiting room, and you will miserably sit in it forever, tightly holding your useless paperwork until someone sicker than you demands your chair. That's my story. One silver cake knife, 31 digital logins, and two beautiful names painted on a concrete wall that absolutely never should have known them. If this terrifying story reminded you to immediately check who still has access to your life, your digital accounts, your medical records, your hard-won peace, do it today, not Sunday. And share this story with someone who desperately keeps the toxic family peace at her own crushing expense. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one on Shattered Hearts.